Hi, welcome to this lesson on C# and ASP.NET. We're building a web application in this video that is going to demonstrate some data validation. So it's called Appointment Maker, and you can see this application has a bunch of different types of data. When I choose Create, I create an appointment for one of my patients. So you can see here on the screen that I have the $sign format here showing correctly and the date format. Now if I go back to the list, I can see all the appointments that I've created. And if I make a new one, and this time I leave something out, such as I just put in a short name and leave the rest of them blank, you're going to see some information that says the validation is incorrect. So if I leave them all blank and choose Create, I get more messages. So in this lesson, we're going to learn how to do this data validation and how to manage a list of appointments. So let's go through the steps of building this application. So I'm going to Visual Studio and choosing Create a new application. I'm going to select ASP Core Web Application, making sure that I'm using C#. Next, and I'm going to call this thing Appointment Maker. Now I'm going to select .NET Core and ASP5, which is the current version here. We're going to make a Model View Controller app and no authentication. Look at the rest of these details and choose Create. All right, the application looks like it's ready to go, so let's close this window. Databases will not be used in this version, so I'll close that. Let's go into the folders. Controllers, models, and views is what we're interested in. We're going to start with a model because this is where the data validation occurs. This is the most important part of our lesson right now. So I'm right-clicking and I'm going to add a new item. Let's go and give this thing an appointment model name. Now let's give this object a bunch of properties. So I want to pick some things that have a variety of data types. So the first thing is the patient's name. We'll give it a string. The second, let's use date time. So this will be the appointment date that we're going to schedule. Let's choose a decimal. And I'm going to be a little cynical and say the patient's net worth is important when you make a doctor's appointment. Let's give the string to the doctor's full name. And then finally, let's give an integer for the pain level. So you can report how badly you're feeling when you make an appointment. So this will be all the properties for now that we'll use to build our model. All right, so now we need to make something happen. So that happens in the controller. So I'm going to right-click in the controllers and choose Add New Controller. And we'll call this thing Appointment Controller. All right, so here's the default index item. We're going to leave that for now. We're going to use that to show a list of appointments later. But right now I want to create a method that will actually create a new appointment. So the method I'm going to create is called create. So public iActionResult create. And then we're going to return a view. So this is the two actions that we can do now in our controller. We can show a list, which will be index later. And then right now we're going to create the view for the create option. So let's do the creation part. Let's right-click inside of create and choose add view. Now we're going to select the second option that says make sure that you choose a razor view with or without a strongly typed model. So we're going to do it with a model. We just created the model and we'll use it now. We'll choose add. So the view name is called create, which is going to be a data entry form where we create our appointment. So we select the item called create. That's our template. And then the model that we're going to put into that template is the appointment model. Let's choose this as a partial view and click the add button. Hey, look at this. We've got ourselves a create form. So what do we have inside of here that we can recognize right now? So first of all, at the top, you can see that there is an action to this form. We're going to modify this later because this action refers to itself. So if we submit the form, it will go nowhere. So we're going to have to fix that. Now, the important part of our lesson here is about data validation. And you can see that there is a validation summary section here. And this is an empty div right now. You can see there's nothing there, but ASP.NET will be putting in error messages there if they occur. And you can see the different formatting goes along here, such as validation. Danger is the red text in the CSS formatting that we're working with here in Bootstrap. And so this will contain text if there is a validation error. So you can see that repeats all the way down through the end. And there is a validation script that is going to be executed during our submit form. So this piece of code here is probably JavaScript, and it will generate an error on the page if you forget to put in one of the values. So how do we make those values appear? Well, let's see what happens if we just run this application and put in nothing. All right, so the application is compiled and we're ready to run it now. So up in the URL bar, I'm going to type in the word appointment, and that is the name of the controller. And we also have the action called create. So appointment/create, and when we press enter, we get this form. So what you see on the left side is the HTML and CSS for this form, and the right side, of course, is the web browser. Now I'm just going to leave everything blank and click create. So immediately we start to see some red text, not for every field, but for some of them. So why would some of these be considered required and others are okay to be empty? So these need to have some value put into them as they can't be null, in other words. So the patient name is a string, and it's okay for a string to be null. It's valid. A date obviously has to have some value in it. Integers and decimals, they need to have values as well. So the doctor's name and the patient's name do not have any validation, and they are allowed to be empty. But the others were required. So that is by default the validation that you'll get in an entry form. It will not allow you to put in null values for certain kinds of data types. All right, let's switch back into the models, and I'm going to the appointment model. I'm going to add a few more items to here to make the display a little bit better. So in front of the patient's name, or just above the patient's name, I'm going to use a square bracket and the word display name, parentheses, and then a string. You can put any string in here you want, and the one that makes sense to me is patient's full name. Now you can see that there's some angry underlines. So the red line is telling us that there is a problem. It says, don't understand what this name attribute is. So let's do show potential fixes, and we'll use the first one that says using system component model. And so now we have a validation, which is really more of a display name, and it will show it on the screen when the form displays. All right, what I'd like you to do now is to put a display name for the rest of these. So it really doesn't matter what you exactly put in here, so you can follow my example or pick your own. So for the date, I'm going to call this thing the appointment request date. And then for the doctor's name, we'll call it primary doctor's last name. We'll do patient's approximate net worth, and then the patient's perceived level of pain. And I'm going to define that from 1 to 10. So you can put in any kind of a string there you want, but this will display on the form when we show it. So I'm going to test that out to see if any of these strings actually showed up. So let's run the app. All right, my application is compiled and running. So I'm going to go ahead and put in the same URL before, appointment/create. And when we see the list now, the display name has a more descriptive label for each of these. So for instance, it says patient's full name, and you can see down here at the bottom, this is obvious, it says patient's perceived level of pain. And so it has a whole string there. So this here is the first noticeable change that you've made here. It's not really data validation yet, but it's very related to it. Next, I'm going to put some restrictions on, such as the name of the length of the names and the values of their money and other things. So let's go put some extra restrictions in our model. So the first restriction I'm going to do is add a required statement. So you noticed when we did it earlier, required was not really necessary, but we can put it in here. So if I put in the word required in front of the patient's name and then choose the import for the data annotations, it will not allow me to leave the patient's name empty. Now just to prove that, I'm going to leave the doctor's name as it is, and so the doctor should be an optional string. Let's run it and see if that works. All right, let's go ahead and run this with the proper URL. So I'm going to type the letter A and fill in the rest with appointment/create. So now when we have the form here and I choose the create button, we will see that the patient's full name field is now required. And the rest of it here is also required. And notice though, the doctor's last name was not required. So strings are not required to have any value, and this did not cause any problems. So when I put required in for patient's full name, it made this a required field as well. So it's almost as if required were listed on every one of these properties, but I only needed to put it on the first one. So for the patient's full name, I'm going to put a requirement on it. So we'll call this thing string length, and I'll put in a parentheses and 20. So 20, as you can see from the suggestions, is the maximum. Maximum length is 20 characters. And then after the comma, I'm going to give it a minimum length of 4. The next type of data validation that I can put in here is for the data type. So for the date, we're going to have a specific type of data that we'll accept. And so data type dot date is what I'm looking for. So that will be our request of the appointment. The next field is the patient's net worth, which is dollars or currency. So the data type here is going to be data type dot currency. Let's skip down to the bottom where it's got the patient's pain level. And so we're going to restrict this between 1 and 10. So integers between 1 and 10. And you can see that range is the proper thing here. And we'll put in parentheses with the minimum and then the maximum. And so all of these are now data validation rules that we should see when we try to enter numbers into our form. Let's try it out. All right, so here's the data entry form. Now let's just test this first one out. So you can see the minimum length is supposed to be 4 letters. So if I put in just 2, such as the word me, and choose create, I get a validation rule that tells me that the minimum length is 4, the maximum is 20. So let's put in Jimmy for our appointment. That should be working. Now let's go with the date. So let's pick some date here. Let's go out to 2022 and let's check it. Now the approximate net worth. So I didn't put the range in here. We'll do that later, but for right now I'm just going to put in here a lot and see how that works. And let's see, the doctor's last name is Smith. So you can see as soon as I tabbed on to Smith, it says here the patient's net worth is a number. So I have to put in something. Let's give him $100. And now the perceived pain. The guy says I'm in awful pain. I'm at 11. So let's choose create on this one. And you can see the data rule shows up that says must be between 1 and 10. So we'll give you a 10, Jimmy, and let's see how that works. So it created whatever it was supposed to do and then returned us back to this form. The next step is we are going to display the data from this form on another form. So let's return to the controller and we're going to add a new action. So what I want to show now is the details of one item. So a common name for that action is details. I could call it show details or I could just call it details. Either one will work. But what I need to send then is a piece of data. So in the parentheses, we're expecting this to receive a appointment model. So if I get an appointment, I'm going to send it on. Let's see if we can provide this with a potential fix that says use the models. Now when I return the view, I could put in the word here, details, comma, appointment. Or if I just leave out the details, that will still work. But we don't have that view yet, so let's make it. So I'm going to right click and choose create. So add view is what I'm looking for. Choose the razor view, choose add. We're going to use details as the name. The template is called details. And then we're going to use the model, which is our appointment model. Let's check the add button and see how this works out. All right, it looks like the view has been created. Now you can see that this is just a list. There's no form or anything on it. It's just a list of data. And each item has a little function in it that says I'm going to display the patient name and the date and so on. So this will be great if it works. Now you notice the model is listed on line 1. So it's expecting us to send a model. But where is it coming from? We have to go back to our data entry form to fix that. So let's go to the Create CS HTML page. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, line 7 has an action and it's returning to itself. So the action that we're looking for now is, wait for it, can you guess? we want to go to the details action. So we're using the default controller, which is the appointments controller, and then it says the ASP action is the details section. So we should be able to display a summary after we click create. Let's see if it works. All right, let's go ahead and get to the create form. So let's put in the appropriate URL, and we have the appointment create screen. Okay, so let's put in the people's names again. So let's put in Jimmy and the usual things. So his date, and let's check it, and let's go to the approximate net worth. It's $100. The last name is Smith, and his pain is, let's give him a 5. Go ahead and choose create. So it sends it off to the controller, and then it returns to say, hey, you wanted details? Here's the details. So we have all of these different values, and they're formatted correctly. So even the $100 shows up with a $sign. So there is a details form. Now this says, do you want to go back to the list? If we choose that, this will return us back to a thing that doesn't exist yet. And so we're going to have to fix this. It says there is no view called index. Doesn't exist, needs to be made. Now I'm just going to show you how to make that index. So right now we don't have any list of things that we're managing. So let's make a list. So the list I'm going to create is a list of appointments, appointment models, right? Appointment model is my type. And let's call it appointments. So when this controller is first launched, it's going to create a new list. And I'm going to make this static so that way it sticks around between different calls. It doesn't change. So the create menu doesn't really create anything. It shows the create form. Where does it actually go after we submit the create form? Well, we saw that it goes to this details item. So let's add an item here in the appointments. So you can see that we're going to take the appointments list, .add, and add the new appointment to it. So the data validation hopefully worked, and now we have a valid appointment that we can add onto it. This will still only display one appointment. However, where would we display a list of those? Well, that would be from the index. So let's go to the view parentheses here and add a parameter. We're going to call this thing appointments. So we're going to send a list of appointments. Now, we don't have the index view. So let's create that, and it will allow it to generate a list for us. So this is pretty nice. It does it automatically. Let's choose add view. Let's choose razor view. And this time we're going to select the template for list. And since we have a list in our application now, we can pick it from the menu here. So which one is the list? Well, it's going to be made of this model. So a list of appointment models is what I'm selecting. And now choose add. Let's see what that generates. Well, it looks like the code has been generated for me. Let's take a look at some of the important parts of it. So first of all, you're going to notice something different on line 1. Usually on line 1, it tells you what the model is. Well, this does tell you what the model is, but it's in a different format. It's now expecting of an interface called IEnumerable. So translate that into your knowledge of what a list is. So an enumerable includes lists, among other types of data. So in other words, we're looking for a list of what type? Of a type model. Of the appointment model. So we're expecting a list of things. Well, what do you do with a list? Well, you display it in a table, of course. And so we have ourselves a list of items, and we have a for loop in here. So line 28 says we're going to say for each item in the model. So each item in our list of appointments. And so this will be repeated for as many times as we have items in our appointment list. You can see there's some extra links in here that are going to display in our table. Let's see what this looks like. Okay, so we're going to go into our usual URL. Let's go to the appointment create. Let's generate an appointment and then show a list. So here's the appointment details. We just made an appointment for Jimmy. And now when I choose back to list, look at the item at the bottom here. It says the URL is going to appointment, no slash. In other words, this is the index item. So let's choose this. And you can see that we have our first appointment. And there's a create new. And let's see what that link leads us to. You can see at the bottom of the screen that at create is the URL. So if I choose this, we can create another appointment. So let's make one for Gina, and let's see how that looks in the table. So we'll go through all of these items, and we'll add Gina's list in just a second here. Okay, so we have Gina's details, and now if I choose back to lists, I will see 2 rows in the table. Now there are other links that we have not programmed yet. There's an edit form that you can make. You can show the details, which will bring us to the details, and then also the delete button. So delete has not been completed as well. Let's see if details works. So sure enough, there is the details of our appointment. So now we've got ourselves a pretty good functioning app as far as managing a list. What I have demonstrated is data formatting and data validation, which things are required, which fields have different limits on their values. All right, so now I've given you a pretty good outline of how this application works. Now it's time for you to add some of your own customizations. So let's look at the challenges. So what I'd like you to do is add some address fields. So let's give a street, a city, a zip code, email, and a phone. Now each of these are going to have their own data formats. So does email have a format? Sure does. Now, then after you've added those properties to the model, then you're going to have to update the show details item. And also the data entry form is not going to be correct either. So you're going to have to recreate those. And then I would like to add 2 rules. So our doctors are greedy, and they would refuse to see anyone whose range of salary or net worth is below 90,000. So minimum of 90,000, maximum, who knows, $1 billion, some big number. But the minimum is 90,000. Also, we're not going to let the patients come in until they report a minimum value of 5 for their pain. So cynical doctors that need lots of money and will only see people who are really desperate. So that's the rules. So make those changes. You might have to recreate some of these forms, but when you're done, you'll have a more complex and a more complete data entry form for the patient values. So thanks for watching. Let's get on to the next video where we're going to do some more work in building web applications in C#.